Hello and welcome to Faithfully Stampin' with Jennifer Helm. I am Jennifer Helm, the Faithful Stamper, an independent demonstrator with Stampin' Up. Today I have for you the twisted ribbon technique. I'm not sure if this technique has been around a long time. I got the impression that it has been, but I only ran across it recently, so I decided to try it because I like the look of it. It's very simple, and it kind of looks like you zigzag a ribbon back and forth, except you're using strips of designer series paper. So I'm going to show you how to make this card today with minimal supplies, and it might look like a lot of work, but it's actually not. So we'll go ahead and get started. To start, you will need a card base. I am using Basic White. My card base is 4¼ inches wide by 11 inches long, scored at 5½. You can use whatever style card base you like. So if you have one handy that's 8½ by 5½, go ahead and use that. You don't have to have a specific card base, so whatever your favorite shape is. Next, you will need a cardstock panel that is 5¼ by 4. Mine is Pumpkin Pie, and I ran it through my Parisian 3D embossing folder with my cut and emboss machine. So just gives me a little texture on my card. You do not need any special kind of glue for this card, so you can use your favorite, whether it be Stampin' Seal Plus or another kind of tape runner or even liquid glue. Up to you. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. So just go ahead and put your layer on your card front. You do not have to emboss this. If you prefer plain cardstock, that's fine. Or you could even take an all over kind of stamp like a splatter or a sploosh and do some stamping on your card. So it's whatever you want to do. Now we're going to get into this twisted ribbon panel. So you can go ahead and set this to the side for now. You want to start with a strip of cardstock that is 5 inches by 1 5/8. This will show through on the front of your card, so make sure it's something that goes with your designer series paper. This is Pale Papaya, and I'm simply just pulling the colors out of my designer series paper. Now what you're going to do with this strip of paper is you're going to take a pencil and a ruler, and on both of the long sides you're going to make hash marks or little pencil marks at 1/2 inch increments. I went ahead and did it already, so you can see here I've got my little pencil marks on both sides. And that's going to set you up so you can line those strips of paper up very easily. Now if you have a silicone craft mat, I highly recommend it. This saves my work table all the time from getting messy and gluey. Most of the time anyway. Sometimes I'm still a little dangerous. But I'm going to go ahead and lay my cardstock strip right on there, and that way it won't get stuck to my table, because the strips of paper I'm going to use are going to overhang it a little bit, and since I'm putting glue on them, I don't want it to muck up my table. It'll muck up my mat instead, which is very easily cleanable. All right. So to make our twisted ribbon, you're going to need strips of designer series paper. These are 1/2 inch tall by 2½ inches wide. So a little bit longer than, or a little bit wider than your paper, so that you can have overhang on both ends that we'll trim off when we're done. You'll need about 5 and 5 of 2 different designs. So you might want to have another one handy just in case. It was funny, I made several of these cards and I only needed 10, and then I did one where I needed 11, so I had to go back and cut another piece of paper. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I've got my other design here, so I can use those alternating designs. Now you can start with whichever design you want. If you have one that's more floral and one that's more solid, just pick your favorite. And it's up to you which angle you start your twisted ribbon panel. So it doesn't really matter, there's no rhyme or reason, and once you get started you're going to have to continue in that panel. I'm just letting you know it doesn't matter whether your first strip goes this way or this way. Totally up to you. All right, so take whichever piece you want to start with, flip it over, put some glue on it, and then what you're going to do is line your first strip up with the bottom of your strip of paper. Here is going to be lined up with the top corner, and then run down at a diagonal to this hash mark here on the right side. So you are going to have some overhang, and that's okay. Give that a little press. Now I will say, if you are using liquid glue for this, it will need a little more time to sit. You do have some more flexibility with positioning, although I did find that this one isn't too hard, but the liquid glue does need a little more time to set, so just be forewarned if you're using liquid glue. Absolutely no reason not to. I just want you to know you might need to let it sit for a little bit more time. For your second strip, what you're going to do is line up the right side with the top corner here and run it down so that it leaves a gap and then fits right in between your two hash marks on this side. So usually what I do is I position the left side of the strip here, hold it with my finger, and then maneuver my angle up to where I need it to cross over, and then press it down. So basically we're going to alternate sides, leaving a little triangle in between each of the pieces. So this is a little time consuming. Again, line up your strip of paper with the top and then your hash marks on this other side. If you have any of your pencil hash marks showing, just come back with an eraser when you're all done and your glue is set and just erase that little bit. These are just guidelines for you to follow so that you have nice even spacing. And you may want to look at your paper. With these short strips, you don't have a lot of room to maneuver, but if you're using different sizing, which we'll talk about later, you can maneuver your strip of paper in case there's something you want to be seen a little more and not maybe disappear behind these alternating strips. So just something to keep in mind there. And we are just going to go back and forth. I found the hardest thing with this was making sure I put my glue on the right side of the paper. But really, this is not very complicated. All right, so we're getting there. And again, my silicone mat is making it very easy for me to not worry about getting glue on my work surface. And you will see in a moment when I'm all done this, how easily this is going to pick up off my craft table, even though I've got glue overhanging here on the edges. Okay. So almost there. Whoop. All right, so here, the last one's going to meet the bottom edge of your strip of cardstock. Now, you have two options when you get to this point. You'll see here this triangle is not the same shape as these. If you're okay with that, go ahead and trim the edges off. We'll get to that in a minute. But if you want another triangle that matches up here, you need one more strip of paper, so that's 11. And let's see, glue on this side. It will overhang a lot at the bottom, and what you're going to do is just line the top up like we've been doing and then run it right down to the corner to give you that last triangle. So the look of the card, it isn't very different. Here's two with one with the extra strip and one without. So up to you how you want to handle that. So regardless of whether you put that 11th strip on there or not, what you're going to do is peel it off. That came right off my silicone mat, and I don't even have a lot of mess to clean up. And it might look a little funny now. When you pick it up, sometimes it looks like it's really crooked, and you're probably thinking, oh my gosh, what did I do? It's only because you have overhang. Once we do the trimming here, you won't even notice a bit. So just grab your scissors and trim right along the edges, taking off the excess cardstock. This is the trickiest part when you've got to peel it off your scissors. So really nothing to it. And then when you get to the bottom, just trim straight across the bottom. And like I said, if you use liquid glue for this, you might need to let it sit just a little extra. Our Tombow glue takes a little time to dry, but not a whole lot. So that's really handy. But sometimes if you try to cut or maneuver things too quickly, it will give you a little bit of trouble if it's not set in place. All right. So one last little bit of trimming here. And move my extra pieces, off my table so they don't stick to everything. All right, and now there's my nice straight twisted ribbon panel. Now, if you want, you can just put this directly on your card front, just as it is. I'm going to add a layer of cardstock though, so pulling out colors from my designer series paper to go with the pumpkin pie and the pale papaya, I opted for Evening Evergreen, and I kept my layer very small since I don't have a lot of room to play with here. So this is 5 1/8 of an inch by 1 3/4 of an inch. And so you're just going to glue these together, and then this will get put right on the card front. Remember, narrow border here. Most of the time I stick with a 1/4 inch border, so I have to be careful when I vary from that. Cut a little close on the bottom, but that's okay, we're rolling with it anyway. And then this I'm going to glue straight on the card front as well. Sometimes I use a little extra adhesive when I am dealing with embossed surfaces, just since you've got that texture. I want to make sure this paper is going to grab the whole thing and stay put. And you could put this panel on the right or the left, it doesn't really matter. It's up to you and your design. You have a lot of options when it comes to designing the front of the card. Now, I have a piece of cardstock. This is 2 by 4. And I started out with a wider one. I started out with one that was 2 3/4 inches by 4, but what I discovered was it covered up too much of this beautiful twisted ribbon. So I cut it down a little bit, so you can play with your width of your paper. I ran mine through the Hive 3D embossing folder. It's up to you if you want to emboss it, leave it plain, do some stamping on it. And then I'm going to glue this flat on the card front. Just like so. And I give that a good press to make sure it's staying put. Now I'm going to work with my sentiment. So I have a piece of pale papaya, and I decided to make a Mother's Day card since Mother's Day is coming soon. This is Evening Evergreen ink to go with my color scheme. So there's my image all stamped and ready to go. And I'm going to use my double oval punch. This is one of my favorite punches because it's dual purpose. It has the scalloped oval and the solid one as well. So I'm just going to take a scrap of soft succulent cardstock and pop that scalloped oval out there. And then take my stamped image on the pale papaya, and I'm going to use that bottom portion for the solid oval. I'm actually going to turn it sideways so I can see what I'm doing a little bit better. And once I have this lined up, punch that, toss my scraps. This gets layered together with more adhesive, just like this. And you can play around with your positioning on your sentiment piece. You can put it at the top, at the bottom, in the middle, one way or the other. Have fun. And I am using every scrap of my dimensionals here. Even though I've used most of my sheet, I go ahead and trim the edges and use those little bits too. All right, so the backing's off that. I'm gonna put my sentiment there. And then for one more touch, I have some of our brushed brass butterflies. And using my Take Your Pick tool to put these butterflies in place. This is great for putting any kind of embellishment on the cards. Easy positioning without flinging them across the room or having them get stuck to your fingernails. All right, so there is our twisted ribbon design. Not too hard, not too complicated, just a little bit of time. It honestly took me longer to figure out what shape punch I wanted to use for my sentiment and then where to put it. Took me longer than doing the paper. All right, so I have a couple more samples to show you. So here's another similar design featuring a sneak peek at some of our new Hostess exclusive designer series paper. But again, here I've got the twisted ribbon down the side. I focused with a more central image this time, colored my flowers with watercolor pencils. I didn't like the flowers directly on the card, so I die cut a circle of vellum using one of our new die sets that's coming out next week, the Stylish Shapes. And then I used another one of those dies for my banner here. I didn't like the whole banner. It's got both ends on it. I didn't like the whole thing across the bottom of my card, so I cut it straight down the middle and then had my sentiment here. And I really like how that looked. Added a little bling. These are our new, well, fairly new iridescent rhinestones. They're a fun addition to a lot of cards. And I have a great simple thank you card. Now, you are not just tied into the narrow twisted ribbon panel. You can experiment with if you want with different shapes. So for example, and even the different layouts of your card. So I intended this card to be vertical like this one, but after I put the panel together, I realized my sentiment was going to look better this way. So the card became horizontal. So it's up to you how you want to design it. And instead of the narrow twisted ribbon panel, I decided to play around with different sizes. So this one is 3 by 4, and then I did 2 different layers. No embossing on this one, just different layers of cardstock for the look. And then my sentiment here, and a little added bling, and the card's ready to go. So that's one option for you. And then you can also make a full front card. So here, my backing piece is 5 1/4 by 4, and the only thing that changes with the design is the length of those strips of paper. They're always going to be 1/2 inch tall. You're always going to use your 1/2 inch tick marks along the long sides of the paper. The only thing that's going to be different is the width of your paper. So for example, this one was 3 by 4, so when I cut my strips to 4 inches so that I had the extra room to play. And then with this one, they ran 4 inches across, so I used 5 inch strips of paper, so 1/2 inch by 5 inch to get this look. And I just alternated back and forth all the way across the paper. Now, since this paper is nice and bright and a little on the busy side, I opted for a more simple look with my sentiment and design. So this is a peek at one of our new bundles that's coming next week in our brand new annual catalog for 2022 to 2023. This is our Sending Sunshine bundle. And it's great because it has this beautiful die cut, which you can layer. There's 2 different layering options here, or you can just die cut it and stamp. And then there's a ton of different sentiments that you can use to fit in this rectangle, and there's a longer one as well. But I just opted for this one to keep it simple on that card front. And there's a nice bright happy birthday card ready to go. All right, so there is your twisted ribbon technique. I hope you enjoyed learning how to make that. If you have not already, I would love it if you would subscribe to my YouTube channel. I typically post videos here twice a week. You can also find me over on Facebook as The Faithful Stamper. I offer different projects over there. I go live twice a week, and you might see different contests or challenges over there on that page as well. Thank you so much for watching. Take care, and happy crafting.